Well, good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes or a minute or so. The numbers are still going up quite sharply. People tend to join at 11 o'clock or 11:01, so it's just 11:01 now. We'll give it till 2 minutes past and then we'll begin. So a very good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to this live webinar, Back to the Future. Is your workplace ready for the new normal? Hopefully we can help you with some of those workplace preparations today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items, if I may. This is live, so hopefully the tech will be kind to us, but please do bear with us if anything does go wrong. I've been on webinars before and speakers have suddenly disappeared into the web, so hopefully that won't happen today. We do want this session to be as informative and as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. And if you've got any questions, you can put them on there throughout the session, and we'll pick up as many as we can at the end. There is also a chat function, which we're not using for the questions, but if there's anything else you want to ask us, then you can use that as well. And to save you taking photos of the slides as we go through, we will be emailing a copy of the presentation afterwards to everyone to refer back to. So without further ado, I will first introduce the speakers. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dominic Panaya, CEO at Cleanology. We've got Peter Bell, CEO at Interactive Space, who will be taking us through the government's newly released guidance on employer responsibilities, as well as a real-life workplace case study. We've got Stephen Lynch, Sales Director at Cleanology, who'll be taking us through the government's recommended cleaning regimes and PPE. And we've got Natasha Andrienko, Design Director at Interactive Space, who will be taking us through some of the physical infrastructure modifications that are now needed in workspaces. Before we move on, we did say that this would be an interactive session. So we're going to start with a quick poll. The questions will pop up on your screen shortly. There they go. What percentage, question one, of your staff do you imagine working from home or flexibly in the future? Question two, have you already undertaken any actions to prepare your workplace for staff coming back to work? And if you scroll down, you'll find question three, when do you expect to move staff back into your workplace? And then once you've answered all of those, if you can just hit submit, which is a red button, I'll do that myself as well. There we go. So we'll reveal the results at the end, just before we take questions. So this session has been put together jointly by Cleanology and the Interactive Space team. So you're getting two for the price of one today. Given the content of this session, you will see how close the synergy is between the two companies. So it made sense to bring the expertise of the two disciplines together. So we've got cleaning and workplace consultancy to bring you a best-in-class webinar. Next slide, please. So although the Prime Minister's statement on Sunday was quite thin on detail, a hefty 30-page document was released quietly on Monday night, quite late. And this is the content that we'll be focusing on today. I should just stress that the guidelines are constantly being updated. And we have provided a link at the bottom of the screen, which we'll share with you afterwards, which will take you directly to those guidelines. So the guidance is helpfully divided into different sectors. And obviously we don't have time to cover all of them today. So we're going to use an office as a case study, which Peter will be taking you through shortly. I'm aware we have a number of different sectors on this call, so the same principles do apply across all settings, retail, hospitality, and so on. So next slide, please. And with that in mind, I'm now going to hand over to Peter Bell, who will take you through the detail around employer responsibilities and also today's case study. Over to you, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Dominic, and hello, everybody. Great to see so many clients. The participants are up nearly 200, I can see. So great to welcome everybody to the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Yes, these guidelines, what do they cover? Well, you can see from this list, which is the basic contents page from the document, that the scope is pretty comprehensive. We're going to cover most of these headings this morning, but the principal headline is all about risk and responsibility. Whilst it states in the introduction of the document that it's here to help employers and employees to understand how to work safely during the pandemic, there is a clear onus on the employer to extend their responsibilities for the workplace. The guidelines do not supersede employers' legal obligations relating to health and safety, but they are effectively a supplement to these statutory obligations. And to demonstrate this, you can see a poster up on your screen now, which you need to display as per the usual health and safety poster, and it needs to be signed by the employer or the person who's responsible for health and safety. So move next slide, please. So we're going to go into a sort of detailed case study fairly soon, but the employer's responsibility, going back to that slide, if you wouldn't mind, Susanna, sorry, this poster identifies the 5 steps to a safer working together. And the first step, the guidelines state, is you must carry out a risk assessment, a COVID-19 risk assessment. And you must also share the results of that risk assessment with the people who work there. So that's quite different to the normal risk assessment you have to do. You don't have to actually provide the results unless you're asked for them. But here you have to make sure that people have access and you actually share the information from that risk assessment. The guidelines then focus on cleaning and hygiene procedures, which we're going to cover in a bit more detail later. And that you have to have taken reasonable steps to help people to work from home. You have to have taken reasonable steps to maintain these 2-meter social distance within the workplace. And if you're unable to guarantee that 2-meter social distance, then you have to have done everything practical to manage the transmissional risk. So quite an onus there on the on the employer. As I mentioned earlier on, we're going to go into a live case study now. We've been appointed by an existing client of ours, Newgate Communications. They occupy 25,000 square feet in Basinghall Street, over a couple of floors there. They've currently got 200 staff, all currently working from home, and we're advising them on their return to work strategy. So what you're seeing, you're going to see sort of us go through in a minute, is a real live case study of how we're helping a client get back to work. The person responsible for the health and safety at Newgate is the CEO, Nina Dow. And she had a number of questions that we sat down with her yesterday and went through. Her first question was, what do I have to do to meet these guidelines? So as I mentioned, the first thing she's got to do, and we're undertaking this for her as we speak, is a complete risk assessment, COVID-19 risk assessment. We're using guidance from the World Health Organization and the NHS, and we'll have a completed document by the end of this week. That document is the beginning of the process as far as they're concerned. From what that document says is what they decide that they're going to have to do to start getting their staff back to work. So how do I mitigate these risks, basically? So Nina's considering exactly what I have to do. Well, we've got to ventilate and disinfect the office. That's the first thing we need to do before the place is actually fit for occupancy. We need to install PPE equipment. We're going to do a lot more detail on that a bit later. Almost certainly there's got to be some office rearrangement in terms of seating plans and one-way systems. 100% in terms of communication on guidelines and protocols for staff using common areas, places where they're unlikely to be able to meet those 2-meter social distancing guidelines. And we've got to create a new daily cleaning regime, and it's very, very important. Cleaning is not what it is anymore. Cleaning is not something that we take sort of, accept a poor standard for now. Cleaning is a massive part of health and safety and responsibility now. So a completely new cleaning regime. So I'm going to hand over now and talk to you about that cleaning regime to Stephen Lynch. Stephen.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. So I'll refer back to the government guidance section 5 of the aforementioned document. Basically, we need to create a clean, fresh, healthy environment to ensure employees and indeed our own well-being. And we've looked at 6 points here. There's the aforementioned risk assessment. That needs to be a COVID risk assessment fully conducted on your premises. Firstly, ventilation. It has been 7 weeks since a lot of us have been in the workplace environment. Check and ensure the ventilation system is fully operational. Secondly, air conditioning system. If you've not had the filters replaced, get them replaced. Check with your HVAC engineer to ensure everything is fully operational and as it should be. Thirdly, fresh air. Absolutely very important. Where we can, and I know it's not always possible, open doors and windows and let that lovely fresh air in around the office. Makes a huge difference. Then deep clean. So going from the carpets to the lighting, ensure that every surface is sparkling clean. You know that when you walk into an office, you can tell instantly if it's clean or has been cleaned recently. Deep clean every surface, then follow that up with a disinfection clean. Moving on to the next slide. So disinfection clean. We've been very thorough and we've looked at various different options in the market. We've chosen the fogging spray. This fogging spray comes complete with a trigger mechanism which controls the flow of the disinfectant spray from a fine mist to a spray. It's absolutely ideal for covering all surfaces quickly and evenly. In fact, it's the only way to achieve a thorough, complete result. It's laboratory tested, proven to eradicate coronavirus, 99.9% of bacteria, including MRSA, the common flu, and the swine flu, to name but a few. It's alcohol-free, it's safe to use in the skin, non-irritant, it's non-staining, non-corrosive, and it's safe to use in kitchen surfaces, harmless if ingested. Would not recommend you do so, but it is harmless anyway. Now I'm going to stress that this should be carried out by a specially trained team and should be completed before your staff return to the workplace. And indeed, if a coronavirus outbreak is confirmed within the workplace, then close the office, the workplace, and reapply. We would also recommend that this is done to touch points on a regular basis and perhaps a complete clean once per week. So say every Saturday or Sunday, a complete disinfection clean yet again. Always, always ventilate the area after use. So how does that work in practice? Well, to answer that question, I'm going to hand you back to Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. Yeah, so back to Nina's position, back to Nina's office. Let's look at what we've had to do and what journey we're going to have to take visitors and staff through to get that office back up. And I'm going to hand you over to Natasha now, who's going to take you through that journey. You're going to need to unmute yourself, Natasha. I'm sorry. Back to our...
Good point. Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Peter mentioned, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey throughout the office, the example that we use now, that we go through with the client. What you see in front of you is an example of a typical office, which consists predominantly of an open plan, desking environment, some meeting rooms, and common areas. The first thing we advise you on is providing a clear guidance on social distancing and hygiene to people on their arrival to your office. For example, by putting in floor mat that reminds of the 2-meter rule, the social distance rule. Secondly, the reception area being a high traffic area, obviously we would advise you, if you're in a position to do so, providing the protective reception screens to mitigate the risk of the infection for the staff that works in the reception. You also may want to consider getting a temperature scanner. This is actually not mentioned within the guideline that was being published, but it's up to you if you want to take this further down and extra protect your staff by taking the temperature of people that are going further into the office space. Next item we're showing is a tacky mat that helps to clear your shoes, again, for visitors that going or staff that going into the space further from the reception area or the back entrances, back offices, any access points to the workplace, not just offices. Next is to consider providing the PPE, such as masks and gloves. This is within the guideline. It says that it's not mandatory, but again, it's down to you to consider and assess those risks if you need them or not. Naturally, the first, the station of PPE will be positioned in the reception. Also would advise you to have them in the common areas, such as kitchens, breakouts, potentially printing areas where you have surfaces that have to be shared, where you have equipment that's shared within the staff. And secondly, if you are using PPE, then you will need to provide the disposal stations. In essence, PPE is a clinical waste, so it has to it's got to be disposed accordingly with the special waste collection services and so on. Next slide shows locations of hand sanitizers. The guideline mentions it throughout the whole document. It's absolute must to improve on the hand washing regime, and one way to do so is providing the sanitizer, making sure they are contactless. We're showing a couple of options here. Naturally, the first point would be at any entrance points to the office, workplace, whether it's a reception, back entrances, and so on, and also in all the common areas where, again, you're sharing equipment or items, and obviously throughout the open plan, just as we show it within this example. The signage is crucial. It's very important to deliver this message to your employees, to everyone in the office, to the visitors, to whoever is within the environment. Here we're suggesting to show the messaging on the doors and predominantly within the spaces, on all the doors really. But what you could do there, for example, if it's a toilet door, you can remind people of the regime within the toilet, of the rules, house rules within the toilet. For example, if it's a smaller toilet, making sure that it's only that many people within there, or reminding about the hand washing regimes. If it's a meeting room door, remind them how many people can be within this meeting room, how long the meeting can last, and so on. And if it's common spaces such as breakouts, potentially displaying staggered lunch times, again, about the occupancy levels, how many people can be in this in the kitchen at one time. The bottom line in communication is a key here, and delivering it, portraying it, have it in access and visible throughout the workplace is a key. Going back to Peter, thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Yes, so the next question was, what about the common areas? What about those common areas you just mentioned there? Steve, perhaps you give us a little bit more insight on what we should be doing in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Good question. The guidelines for common areas include staggered lunch breaks to avoid overcrowding in kitchen areas. And as much as it pains us, eliminate shared foods that you've provided for staff previously, such as food bowls, the sweetie jars. I'm afraid they've got to go now. Consider replacing cutlery and kitchenware with disposable options. So perhaps looking at wooden options, or even encouraging staff to bring in their own cutlery. Frequently touched surfaces such as cupboards, fridge doors, fridge handles should be cleaned and disinfected in line with the government directive on a regular basis. And for peace of mind and well-being, your staff should see operatives going around with uniforms, with disinfectant and cleaning these surfaces. Space out or remove excess breakout areas where possible to enhance and create social distancing. Moving on to the washroom. So absolutely social distancing needs to be adhered to in the washroom. There are also other aspects which you should look at as well. Consider replacing the electric hand dryer with paper towels. As you can imagine, when you use a paper hand dryer, the spray does go over the floor and various different surfaces. So using paper towels is going to be far more hygienic go forward. Air sterilisers can be used and could be installed high up on the washroom, and again that just sterilises the environment. Toilet seat sanitisers are highly effective and visible and quite simple to use, should be installed in each cubicle, easy to spray onto some toilet tissue for surfaces to be cleaned as and where people feel appropriate. And remember to separate clinical waste out even in the washrooms. So somebody may walk into the washrooms, remove a face mask, remove gloves, they should have a separate bin that they can use for that environment also. Moving on to the next slide, additional considerations. Now, here are some less obvious but nonetheless important areas that you should consider. Clean desk policy. Now, we all know that when you go in, a cleaning operative, to clean a desk, they don't touch paper. So if the desk is cluttered, they won't touch the areas that are cluttered. So encourage employees to completely have a clean desk environment. Shared IT equipment should be regularly sanitised, such as photocopiers and remote controls. You may wish to consider having hand sanitizer wipes next to each of these environments so that when somebody goes up to use them, you can in fact give everything a bit of a wipe down. Yeah. Consider required social distancing on areas such as staircases and indeed the first aid kit. Does the first aid kit contain gloves, face mask, sanitizer, and as the staircases appropriately mentioned or appropriately noted, where in points and out points. And of course, always ensure that your existing contracts, which include sanitary bins, pest control, those should continue as normal. So with that, I shall hand back to Peter. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you again, Stephen. Yes, so next question from Nina, sort of focusing back on this 2 metre social distancing issue, because how do we do that? We've seen from Natasha earlier on, there are some ways or some mechanisms to remind people to actually maintain that distance, but how do we actually physically do that? How can we ensure that 2 metre social distancing within the workplace? That was a question, Natasha.
Thank you, Peter. To answer this question, I'd like to take one step back and get into the numbers. Look at the statistics. In front of you, you see 2 pie charts. The first represents the survey that was conducted by ONS, Office of National Statistics, before the lockdown. As you can see, even though we were leaning towards the agile and flexible working environment, majority of the people still predominantly worked from the office, and only a small percentage was working from home, with 27% at sometimes office, sometimes home. The second pie chart shows a recent study done by JLL trying to predict the work balance post-COVID. As you can see here, it's almost mirrored. So we already can see that people do prefer working from home, and obviously it depending if business allows and if industry allows to do so. Now going back to the question about 2 meter social distance, the new survey, this survey allows us to manage the occupation levels to enable the social distancing. So now having in mind that you can reduce the amount of staff within your workplace, you can implement, for example, staggered seating. This is what I'm showing here on this slide. In fact, the guideline says that you should consider the following 2 rules or implementations: using back-to-back or side-to-side working rather than face-to-face where it's possible, and reducing the number of people each person has contact with by using fixing teams, so that where contact is unavoidable, this happens between only those teams. So imagine you are considering having a soft start in the office and having some of your employees, say 15 or 30%, going back to the office. What we would advise you is firstly to develop those teams, to identify the department, the teams that need to work together, see who absolutely have to work from the workplace, and then considering the staggered seating and a weekly or different sort of change. So what here I show week 1, 50% of staff, week 2, another half of staff going to the office, having the clean in between, and so on. You may consider that for you it actually works having 20% in the office first week and then another 50 on the second week, depending on the activities. Or you might want to say, no, I'm only going to have the core team in the office constantly and some people coming and out. Obviously, this is all down to your business, your industry, your office environment, and so on. One thing to remember here, what we're showing here is portrait for 14 and 1600 meal wide desks. So it's not going to work every other desk if it's less than 1400 wide. You need to consider if it's 12 or meter, depending on the business, then you need to provide a desk, more than a desk between, so 2, 3, depending. Then what about those situations when you can't have people, you have to have people either next to each other or opposite? Here, as you can see on this side, we're suggesting the protective screens. They're all over now. You can get them. It's accessible. It is a really easy way to eliminate those risks, especially where you have no choice but having people next to each other. As I mentioned before, the best way is probably a must to have the screen in the reception area for the high traffic area to protect your staff. And obviously for the environment where you can't have people, you also consider them for having on the desks or potentially floor standing in the printing areas or common areas. So please do consider those. And then one more thing to look is one-way system. The guidelines suggest that using one-way system flow and entry points and exit points of the workplace. I would also advise on regulating to use the high traffic areas such as corridors and lifts by marking up the one-way system in those areas. Here I'm showing it on the open plan because the open plan is quite wide and allows for this to be replicated here, but predominantly pay attention in the corridors in the high traffic areas. You can use the tape on the floor, on the walls to mark up the one-way system, which way, who goes where. But yeah, that's again one of the easy way to manage that social distance within the workplace. Back to Peter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Yes, so another question. How often should we perform a deep clean, and will we need a daytime cleaner? Great question, and obviously, Stephen, one for you to answer.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, well, creating your own cleaning regime is something that's unique to each office and environment, and indeed each workplace environment. So to do that, we've looked back at the government guidelines and we've put together an example. And the example that we've used is Company A currently have 5 cleaning operatives every weekday morning from 5 AM till 8 AM. They have no further cleaning outside these hours. So in line with government recommendations, you absolutely must increase that cleaning regime. Now, recommendation number 1 would be introducing day cleaning. So constant and visible disinfection of main touch points, such as toilets, door handles, kitchen areas, of a cleaning operative constantly going round with disinfectant spray, cleaning these environments, cleaning these areas, will add to the well-being of your staff. Recommendation 2, weekly disinfection sprays each weekend. Spoke about this a little bit earlier when we were speaking about disinfection sprays. Absolutely ideal thing to do. Thirdly, but by no means last, constant, clear and visible communication to your staff, your customers, and indeed the visitors to your building about your cleaning regime, about your cleaning measurements, and indeed the ability for them to feed back to yourselves with any suggestions or anything that they would like to see to add to their peace of mind. With that, I'm going to hand back to Peter. Thank you, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve. Forgot to unmute there. What can I do to reassure my staff as we start commuting again? So very well getting the office prepared, but what can I do to reassure them when they start coming back in? I'm going to hand back to you again, Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Again, we've reverted back to the government guidelines for this. It's looking at areas such as staggering arrival and departure times, providing additional parking or bike racks, reduce congestion by having more entry points to the workplace, providing more storage for workers so that when they come in, they can actually put their bags, their coats in a storage environment, introducing one-way flows for the entry and exit points. You may want to consider looking at perhaps opening up an emergency exit as an exit point, providing hand wash facilities and sanitizer stations at entry and exit points, not using touch-based security devices such as keypads. So going on from that, we've looked at personal protection equipment. And again, it's for peace of mind commuting. And we've looked at basically three products here in the face mask environment. Now, I have to say that I consider myself a strong-minded individual, but when I'm thinking about starting back at work and going back into the office, and I'm standing there at Bank Station, 4 deep, trying to squeeze my way back on a tube, let's just say I feel a little bit less than comfortable. So supplying these items would add to that level of comfort and add to that well-being. The first up product is a 3-ply surgical face mask. It's designed as disposable. It's single use, designed for a single commute, or indeed when visitors come into your working environment, you can have a store of them at the reception desk. They can use them when they come into the working environment. Moving along to the second one, the KN90, sorry, go back a slide. The KN95 FFP2 face mask. And this is designed for longer use. It does have a filter inside. As long as the filter is changed after each use, it's perfectly good to use again and again. The third face mask is a washable and reusable face mask. And this is designed for comfort and longer term use. Moving on to the next slide. Again, we've looked at 3 products here. We've looked at gloves, hand wipes, and alcohol hand sanitizer gel. So the gloves, the simple nitrile gloves as pictured, high quality, strong and reusable. There are lots in the market, just choose whatever one works for yourselves. Hand wipes, these should be placed at regular points throughout the workplace. Indeed, they're good to carry in your pocket, your handbag. So if you're on public transport, you can wipe down various different areas, or if you're in an environment where you're perhaps using seating, again, it's peace of mind. The World Health Organization recommends hand gel, alcohol gel, with at least 60% alcohol content. These again should be placed at regular points and indeed perhaps be given out to the workforce as a gift, if you like, on returning to work. Now, it's not the employer's responsibility to cater for the commute, but perhaps it's something that you may wish to do. It may be something that you see as a nice to do. Thank you for that. I'll hand back to Peter. Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. And you mentioned the word responsibility again, and that's sort of where I'm ending my piece on. We've spoken earlier on about employers' responsibility being really clear with the guidelines, the onus being on the employer. But I think we probably, most of us as business owners and sort of managers, we've got to think about shared responsibility here. So a responsibility not just of the employer, next slide please, not just of the employer, but also for the employee. You know, from my perspective, I think that we need to be thinking about encouraging employees to take some responsibility to notify us if they've maybe taken their own temperature when they leave home in the morning, you know, because some of the symptoms of the virus are not that clear. You could have the virus and not actually be symptomatic, but temperature is a clear symptom. So some of our clients we've been talking to have been discussing having a questionnaire. So when employees come into the office, they have to fill out a quick questionnaire. You know, how are you feeling? Basic stuff. You know, do you have a temperature? Have you been in contact with anybody that you think might have had the virus? You know, pretty basic stuff. But I just think that it's actually establishing a culture now of working together, employee and employer, and sharing that responsibility. So I think that's just a point I really wanted to make about today's webinar and presentation, is to try and make sure that we talk about shared responsibility. I'm going to hand back over now to Dominic, who's going to sort of wind up with some main takeaways. Dominic.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to Stephen and Natasha too for their very informative presentations. There has been a lot of information released in just the last few days, but I hope that quick summary you know, has been helpful. We're going to just do a few main takeaways, just you know, points for you to take away, key highlights. The government have issued very clear guidelines now, and we recommend that each company studies them, as obviously implementation will be different for each business. As Peter has mentioned, risk assessments must be carried out by each business before returning to work. Each business has the responsibility to manage and of course mitigate their risk. Enhanced and visible cleaning has been mentioned several times throughout the government guidelines and really is key to giving our building users confidence and reassurance as they return to work. So much of this is around perception and, you know, as well as maintaining high cleaning standards, but just giving people that comfort, having not been in the workplace for so long. PPE also is critical for reassuring our colleagues who are returning to work. Having been at home for so many weeks and indeed months, people will be feeling very uneasy about getting back on tubes and buses. I know it's something that I'm not looking forward to. And PPE will give people some sense of protection and reassurance. And social distancing will obviously need to be adhered to within workplaces as well. And that will require significant physical and procedural changes for most businesses. Obviously, where it's not possible to socially distance, there are obviously a number of you on this call who are in smaller office buildings, then of course staff should be offered appropriate PPE as protection, and there are some questions on that we'll come on to. Communication of all these changes will be absolutely key. Clear, visible and regular communication. So be that signage around the office, company meetings or mail shots to staff, customers and visitors. And finally, as Peter has stressed, responsibilities. You know, these are shared responsibilities between employers and employees. Pretty much everyone on this call has got some degree of responsibility for the health and well-being of their workplace colleagues. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I can see the number of attendees has actually gone up throughout that call, and I'm sorry to some of you who struggled to get on at the beginning. I think there was an issue with the link, so I do apologize for that. We are going to go to the result of the poll before we take your questions, and there are quite a number of questions, so we'll go through this fairly speedily. What percentage of your staff do you imagine working from home flexibly in the future? So the 25 to 50% of you is the largest category think that will be the case. So it's quite evenly split actually, more so than I would have expected. I actually would have expected that to be 50% or more saying that you will be working flexibly from home. Question 2, have you already undertaken any actions to prepare your workplace for staff coming back to work? So some of you have not started at all. Some of you, very efficient, have all completed the plans. And most of us are at the early stages. And obviously with that information just being released a couple of days ago, I think probably, yeah, the vast majority, 68% are in that category. And lastly, when do you expect to move back into your workplace? Most of us are saying we're not decided, but apart from that, June and then July, and then some are saying later this year. So not many planning to move back in May, which is quite interesting. When we all went into lockdown, my expectation was that we would all come out of lockdown in the same way we went into it, which is, I guess, what a lot of people would have thought, but that hasn't been the case at all. It's going to be much more drawn out. So we'll go to the questions now. Just fire these up. So the first question, we'll take them in order that they've been submitted. If the building has been empty since the beginning of lockdown, does it still need disinfecting? That's probably one for Stephen, I think.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Amanda. I would say absolutely 100%, Amanda. If you go back through, and I know I've mentioned the government guidelines several times, but if you go back through the guidelines, it is a recommendation, and I would absolutely follow that recommendation.
And we have a question here from Wayne. How quickly can I get a risk assessment done? We're based in Victoria.
Yeah, I'll pick that up. Yeah, we could certainly undertake a risk assessment, probably within 2 to 3 days of instruction. Certainly if it's in central London, Victoria is very easy to get to. And whether you use us or a number of other agencies, we're used to doing risk assessments. We do health and safety risk assessments for our clients. But you know, you should be able to get somebody there fairly quickly, particularly if the buildings aren't occupied. If it was already occupied, you've probably broken the rule, as it were. But yeah, 2 to 3 days would be the answer.
We have an anonymous question. What happens if people refuse to have their temperature taken when they arrive?
I'm quite happy to take that question. You can't force somebody to have their temperature taken. Basically, whether you allow them then to go into the building is entirely up to yourself. But you certainly can't force somebody to have their temperature taken.
Thank you, Stephen.
Just to add, it's about those responsibilities between employer and employee. Every employee really should have responsibility to make sure that they are safe and don't impose any risks to the rest of the employees. So it works both ways. Actually, this question is brilliant, I thought.
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. Should employers be providing PPE for their staff to get to work, or should employees source their own? That's from Andrea. Thank you, Andrea.
Again, since I spoke about PPE, I'll take that one, Andrea. The answer is that it's not the employer's responsibility to provide PPE to staff for their commute. That is entirely your own responsibility. Maybe considered a nice thing to do and help with the well-being, but absolutely the responsibility lies with the employee to get themselves to and from work in a safe manner and provide their own PPE.
Yeah, I would add to that, Stephen, that I know of a number of employers who are providing PPE for their staff, both within the office and for commuting. Certainly, that's something that we will be doing as a business.
And can I also add to this? Within the guide, it says because you have to identify those that are at further risk or less risk, and actually the guidelines advises you if there are some people that are absolutely crucial to business and they are at risk of maybe traveling or so on, then they advise that potentially employers may consider providing the PPE, and that's a separate line within the guideline.
Yeah, there is also the much discussed topic of well-being, and for staff well-being, you know, if you decided to send out a pack to all employees' homes containing gloves, mask and hand gel for the first commute back, would be a lovely thing to do for well-being, but it is just that. It's a nice thing to do.
Thank you, Stephen. We've got a question from Andy. What if we can't open windows to ventilate the office? That's a very good question.
Yeah, Andy Hogg, hi. Hi, Andy. Yeah, it is a good question, and you'll find in a lot of multi-tenanted buildings, landlords, for one reason or other, mainly to maintain air conditioning system sort of regulation, they actually fix the windows so you can't open them. We are encouraging, we're in actually active conversation with a number of landlords at the moment on behalf of our tenant clients to open those windows, you know, even if they have to sort of force them open or open them from their current state to ventilate. Just for this reopening of the office. So it is a really good question, and a lot of people, they don't have access to open windows because of air conditioning systems. If you can't open them, in some cases there are no openable windows, then you've just got to make best endeavours. You know, the guidelines are really trying to emphasise on you taking all practical measures you can do and undertake here. So, I mean, even just opening doors and leaving those open at the moment, which would normally be secured to let air flow through from the common areas, stairwells, etc., etc. So, good question.
We've got another question here about PPE, Stephen. I don't know if you want to take that one. We've read reports in the press about PPE running out. Is that your experience also, from Jonathan Smith?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jonathan. PPE is difficult to get hold of. We do have a supply at this point in time. And again, I would say that it changes constantly, is the bottom line. We do have a supply at this point in time that we expect to continue, so we should be okay, but it is very difficult to source. And also, I'm afraid to say that it can affect the price that we can purchase it at as well.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a question from Keith here. Hi, Keith. Do you feel these measures that we will be adhering to will be here to stay moving forward, or as time moves on, will they be relaxed? That is a very good question. Who wants to pick that one up? Do you want to take that one, Peter?
Well, I think probably everybody could answer a little bit with this one. Until we find a vaccine, life has changed. You know, that's the bottom line. We've called this Back to the Future, this webinar, you know, the new norm, because it's going to be new. And the norm that was before has changed. And until we find a vaccine, it is my opinion that will continue somewhere along those lines, but it will change as and when. You know, the Prime Minister on Sunday put up the chart showing the COVID indicator, and I think it will change in line with the COVID indicator.
Yeah, we were just discussing this last night internally, actually, and you know, when are we going to reopen our own office? And I guess it's very difficult because everyone's got so used to working from home and in this new way. This is what we call the new normal, and it seems to be going on. To put a timeline on it, Keith, I would probably say at least until the end of the year, if not into next year. But yeah, very difficult question to answer. Question from Rocco. Hi, Rocco. What is the cleaning regime for the fabric face mask? How long can it be used for? I'll just take that one quickly. It can be washed as many times as you like. I mean, it should be washed really every day. You know, it's not. I wouldn't use it for a week and then wash it. Put it that way. But yeah, if you have several, it's the most economical and efficient and environmentally friendly way to operate the mask, rather than having a disposable. We have another question here from an anonymous attendee. What would you suggest for offices that only have security keypads to enter the building?
Now that is a very, very difficult question. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, no, I think these are really good questions. I mean, essentially, if you've only got a keypad and you've got to touch it, then you have no choice but to touch it. And one would just suggest that if you know that you've got a keypad, maybe wear some protective gloves when you come in, on the basis that you know you're going to be touching sort of common surfaces who anybody could have been sort of touching. I mean, that I personally would be wearing gloves on the tube on the way in. So that, and then I would dispose of those gloves in a clinical waste disposal as soon as I come into my office. So I think that's really the answer. If you don't have gloves and you've touched a surface that you're not, that you're concerned about, straight away in there, wash your hands, hand sanitize. You know, this is going to be the new rule. So it's a good question. There's going to be lots of, sort of multiple touch areas that you've got to think about that. I've just touched something that somebody else would have touched. I now need to clean my hands.
Peter, there's another one I think here for you. Question from Andy. Should the fire risk, i.e. fire doors, outweigh COVID-19 risk, so wedging open fire doors for ventilation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I saw that come up and I thought, God, I hope nobody asked me that question. Yeah, I think that you're unlikely to be able to circumnavigate fire regs. So I think the answer is likely to be no, because if I was an employer and I was mitigating risk and I was thinking, where's my risk? Somebody would say, well, there's more likelihood of actually contracting the virus than there is of a fire in the building. You could start looking at it that way. But I would say that, what would prevail here would be fire regs. Fire regs are all about the sort of safety for everybody in the building, particularly in multi-tenanted buildings. So if you start wedging open fire doors, yes, you might be putting your own staff at risk, but you're probably in a multi-tenanted building putting other people that are not your responsibility at risk. So there's nothing in the guidelines about that sort of question, but these are great coming in, aren't they? But I would say that it will be fire eggs that would, that would supersede anything else.
We have a practical question here, one for Stephen, I think. How long does a disinfection spray take, and does it leave surfaces wet?
So how long does it take is dependent on the size of the office and your environment. That's probably something we should maybe take offline and answer for you later. It dries within 10 minutes of touching the surface, so it does not leave the surfaces wet.
Thank you, Angela, for that question. And Ian, who's one of our regional managers, has just pointed out to me that if you wash the face mask at 60 to 90 degrees, that will be the right temperature, not 30 or 40 to clean those face masks. We have another question here from Dan. So is it best to send staff home with a slightly elevated temperature with no other symptoms? And how does this apply to chefs who work in higher temperatures? Very good question. Who's going to take that one?
I'll take it. I think, this is all about risk. I'll keep bringing everybody back to this. It's a really good example of where do you draw the line? If somebody's got a temperature, if I was a director of that organization, I would be sending them home. Because certainly right now, at this point, we're still early days really in the concept of returning to work. The virus is prevalent everywhere. You just don't know, so you can't take any risks. So the answer, in my opinion, would be yes, you send them home, even if they have a mild temperature. We're in that kind of mode. 3 or 4 months ago, somebody's got a mild temperature, you say, for goodness sake, get on with work. You don't laugh at them. But now I don't think you can take any risks.
We have a question here from Marie. We are working from home really effectively at the moment. We have no plans to open our offices until at least June or July. What level of measures should we be looking to implement from this time? Do we have any indication of this? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah,
what level of measures should we be looking to implement from this time?
Yeah, I'll attempt to answer that, Marie. Basically, I think if you go back through, and I would suggest that you do read through the government document, we will make that available. But if you go back through the presentation today, making sure that the air conditioning is working, that the airflow through the building, so it should be opened up and it should be checked on a regular basis. How often is that? Depends on the size of the office, depends on the size of the building. But I would definitely say on a regular basis, it should be looked at. And certainly from time to time, it should be deep cleaned. So get your cleaning crew in and get them to deep clean the office and make sure that the standards are maintained.
Thank you, Stephen. A question from Stephen Ford. If we are in a shared office building, is there any responsibility on the landlord to provide safety equipment, or is this the responsibility of the individual companies?
Yeah, well, another one of my hobby horses, this one, landlord responsibility particularly, and I think this is a moment in time when landlords really do need to step up. Again, nothing in the guidelines there, of course, because it's very specific, but a landlord also has to mitigate risk. So if I was a landlord, and I'm talking to plenty of them at the moment, they are stepping up all of their own cleaning regimes, funnily enough. They are disinfecting all their areas. They're taking all the measures that we've discussed in terms of HVAC, ventilation, etc., etc. In common areas, they are looking at providing PPE. So it's going to vary because landlords are, sorry to say, they're strange beings. They take responsibility at one level, and other levels they see it's all the tenant's responsibility. But whatever the landlord does, in my opinion, it doesn't mitigate you as an employer and you as the responsible person for health and safety for your employees from saying, well, as soon as they step outside here into the common area of a multi-tenanted building, it's no longer my responsibility. I, as an employer, would not take that on. I'd actually say, right, okay, regardless of what the landlord's doing, I would make sure that my employees were safe in common areas at work. So it's a really good question again, but it's about responsibility on two levels. I'm the employer, so I've got to think about those common areas being provided by the landlord. And if I'm not satisfied, or if there's any risk, then I will look to mitigate that risk. Landlords should absolutely be stepping up and doing the same. This is a moment about communication. Landlords and tenants communicating together and agreeing what the best thing for that building is. I don't know if that answered the question, but onto a hobby horse of mine.
Thank you, Peter. We have a question here from Galaxy S8 Plus. We are in a small office on 3 floors, so one-way system fails as there are stairs. How do we go about it?
I'll answer that. Thank you. Good question. And there'll be loads like this that are in the situation that they have to step up on the health and safety. Again, where you can't maintain the one-way system or staggered seating or 2-meter social distance, you need to make sure that you're diminish those risks by either providing the screens or making sure that only certain amount of people can use certain areas at one time. Even having the rules in house saying, you know, only 2 people on the staircase at one time. Obviously, that doesn't apply to the situations where it's an emergency situation or anything like that. So just keeping those numbers to minimum, making sure potentially if you have an option to do so is having less staff in the office on any one day. And again, maybe consider having the teams on one floor. So if you are across 3 floors, having them at the bottom, maybe with rotating the teams, something like that. Can further look into this.
I'm just going to follow up on that, Natasha. Yeah, and looking at number 5 on the 5 steps to working sort of safely together, you know, where people cannot be 2 meters apart, this is the guideline. We have done everything practical to manage transmission risk. And that's the onus again back onto the employer. But again, those guidelines given to employees, you know, if we know that you can't maintain that distance, then we put some very strict rules in on the employees and say you can't have more than 2 people in the toilet. You cannot have more than 2 people on the stairway. That's the employer enforcing that sort of everything practical to manage transmission risk. Conscious of time, Dominic.
Yeah, I know we've got 2 minutes left, and then we're going to wrap up. We have slightly overrun, but there's a lot of questions coming in. A couple here which are quite good. Who is going to collect clinical waste? Do they need to adapt to this, to these changes, waste companies? So waste companies are adapting to that at the moment. Just purely from our point of view, if you are a current client and you work with us already, we do have that in place and obviously ready to go. It's something that, you know, has been brought in especially for this. So if you want to message, you know, one of us afterwards, we can pick that up for you. There's another one here around responsibilities, which is very good, anonymous. How are the responsibilities shared if you sublet office space?
Oh, that's a great one. God, they're great, aren't they? So basically, if you are the sublessor, and on the basis that you do not have a sort of contained space for your sublessee, then you have responsibility as well as a shared responsibility between you and the sublessor. Okay, so but essentially whoever's subletting has their own individual responsibility for the health and safety of their staff. But it's a good question because there could be a bit of a sort of a little bit like a landlord. You're a landlord effectively, you're subletting space, so you have got responsibility. So it's shared, I would say, but don't forget individual responsibility for the individual employer.
And we'll just squeeze in one more. Would staggered seating and working back to back work in a small office environment? From Jeannie. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good question. So yes, it will. Provided how many people you will have at any one time in the office. And again, where you can't maintain the 2-meter distance, consider the screens, consider maybe having different times working as teams, spreading the teams throughout the day. Again, don't forget about the air circulation within the office. If it's enclosed small office environment, say 4 or 6 desks, make sure that obviously you will have people sitting next to each other. Make sure that the air is ventilated throughout the day. I think that's really key here.
Thank you, Natasha. And I'm really sorry, there are some more questions, but I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to let you let everyone get away. We do have one more question we'd like to ask you, though. There is one more little poll, just one question on your feedback of today's session. I hope it's been helpful and has probably raised more questions than answered. But thank you very much for making the time to come. Peter, do you want to say?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, thanks very much again, everybody. Really, it's great to have so many people. We were not expecting this level of participation. You know, 200 people is incredible. But there are a few questions that stray questions that ended up on the chat. I noticed. And for those that didn't get their questions answered, because literally we had dozens, I know you're picking them out there, Dominic, but we will come back to every single one of you and answer those questions directly, okay? So if you didn't get your question answered now, we will come back to you. So thanks very much for making this such a great event.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Bye.